Watch a black lizard walk down a slab of volcanic rock and into the Pacific Ocean. It does not hesitate at the waterline. It goes in past the surf and keeps going down, 5 meters, 8, 10, until it reaches the seafloor. There it hooks its claws into the rock so the current cannot take it, puts its face flat against the stone, and starts eating algae, like a cow underwater, on the bottom of the ocean. It is the only lizard on Earth that does this. There is no other. Out of more than 7,000 species of lizard on this planet, exactly one feeds in the sea, and it is here. And that is not even the strange part. Every few years, the current that feeds these islands shuts down. The water warms, and the algae it eats dies off almost completely. The animal cannot migrate. It cannot switch to anything else. So it shrinks, not thinner, shorter, resorbing its own skeleton until its body is small enough to survive on nothing, and then growing the bone back when the food returns. Individuals have been measured doing this repeatedly across decades. Now, walk up that beach. The sea lion sprawled across the sand does not lift its head. The iguana on the path does not move, so you go around it. The booby sitting on an egg a meter from your feet looks at you and goes back to what it was doing. Nothing here runs. Nothing here even particularly cares. That is not tameness. That is the entire explanation for these islands in a single observation. And by the end of this video, you are going to understand why it is also the reason they were nearly destroyed. Because this is a place where almost nothing arrived that wanted to eat anything else. And life was left alone with that fact for millions of years. What it did with the freedom is genuinely difficult to believe. There is a penguin here living on the equator, thousands of kilometers from any ice. There is a bird here that has been safe for so long that it simply lost the ability to fly. Its wings are now useless stubs, and there are only about 1,000 of them left in the world, all on the coastline of 2 islands. There is a daisy here that grew into a forest 15 meters tall because there were no trees and the position was open. And there is one more. On 2 of the most remote rocks in the chain lives a small brown songbird, an ordinary-looking finch. Nothing about it that would make you look twice. That walks up to seabirds many times its size, opens a wound at the base of their feathers and drinks their blood. And the seabird lets it. That one we are saving for the end. This is Galapagos. Before we go in, if you are the kind of person who watches a documentary like this all the way to the end, this channel was built for you. Subscribe to DocWild 4K right now and turn on the bell so you never miss one. And tell us in the comments which country or city you are watching from today. We read every single one. Now let's go. To understand why the animals here are so strange, you have to understand that these islands should not be here at all. Galapagos sits on the equator, about 900 kilometers west of Ecuador in open ocean. There is no continental shelf connecting it to anything. It rose out of deep water. Underneath it is a hot spot, a plume of magma rising from deep in the mantle, punching through the ocean floor. The seafloor above it, the Nazca Plate, is sliding slowly eastward at about 5 centimeters a year, roughly the speed your fingernails grow. So the hot spot builds a volcano, the plate carries it away, and the hot spot builds another one behind it. The result is a conveyor belt of islands, arranged by age. In the east, Hispaniola and San Cristobal are the elders, several million years old, worn down, eroded. Their volcanoes long dead. In the west, Fernandina and Isabella are new, under 1 million years old, still actively erupting, still building themselves. Fernandina is one of the most volcanically active places on Earth. That age gradient matters more than it sounds, because it means the islands did not all get their animals at the same time. Each one was colonized separately at different points in deep time by whatever happened to survive the crossing. And then each population was left alone, on its own island, with its own conditions, for a very long time. That is the whole engine. Isolation plus time. Now add the water because the water is what makes Galapagos genuinely bizarre. These islands sit on the equator. They should be tropical. Warm water, coral reefs, the whole postcard. They are not. Cold currents converge here. The Humboldt Current runs up the coast of South America, carrying cold water from the far south. And beneath the surface, the Cromwell Current, a deep undercurrent flowing eastward across the Pacific, slams into the western wall of the archipelago and is forced upward. That upwelling drags cold, nutrient-rich water from the deep ocean to the surface right at the equator. The consequence is that the sea around Galapagos is far colder and far richer than it has any right to be. There is plankton where there should be clear blue emptiness. There are fish in enormous numbers. There is enough food in this water to support penguins, fur seals, and sea lions on the equator, animals you would otherwise have to travel thousands of kilometers south to find. The islands themselves are the opposite: dry, volcanic, harsh, black lava, cactus, thorn scrub, almost no fresh water. Life on land here is scraping by. Life in the water here is abundant, which is why the most famous animal in Galapagos made the obvious decision and became the only one of its kind on Earth. So let's go back to that lizard, because the way it was built is a catalog of everything these islands do. Somewhere between 5 and 10 million years ago, an iguana from South America washed out to sea, almost certainly on a raft of vegetation, which is how almost everything got here, and arrived on a volcanic island with almost nothing growing on it. Its descendants faced a simple problem. The land had no food, and the sea had plenty. Everything about the animal you see today comes from solving that. It is black, which is not camouflage. It is a solar panel. After a dive, an iguana's body temperature can drop by 10 degrees or more, and it has to bake that heat back into itself before it can move properly again. So it hauls out onto black lava, which is already absorbing tropical sun, and lies flat against it with its body pressed to the rock. Its tail is laterally flattened like an oar. Its claws are long and strongly curved, not for digging but for gripping wet volcanic rock while surf tries to drag it off. Its snout is short and blunt, which lets it get its mouth flat against a rock surface to scrape algae. The same reason a horse's face is shaped the way it is. Larger males dive. They go down as far as 10 meters, sometimes deeper, and stay under for a few minutes at a time, holding onto the bottom with those claws while they graze. Smaller animals and females mostly feed in the intertidal zone at low tide because the cost of losing that much body heat is too high for a small body. And then there is the salt. Eating seaweed means swallowing seawater constantly. A reptile's kidneys cannot process that much salt without wasting enormous amounts of water. So the marine iguana has specialized glands connected to its nostrils that pull excess salt out of the bloodstream and concentrate it. And then it sneezes. Sit near a colony and you will hear it constantly. Sharp, sudden expulsions of salt spray over and over, up and down the shoreline. The spray lands on their heads and dries there, which is why so many of them look like they have been dusted with white powder. And now the shrinking, which I opened this video with, because the numbers deserve to be said properly. During a severe El Niño, marine iguanas have been documented losing up to 20% of their body length. 20% of the length of a vertebrate is not fat, and it is not water. It is bone. The animal is dismantling parts of its own skeleton to reduce the body it has to feed, holding at that smaller size for as long as the famine lasts, and rebuilding when the algae comes back. No other vertebrate is known to do this as a routine survival strategy. Not one. The animal the islands are actually named for solved a completely different problem, and it did so by becoming enormous and extremely slow. Galapago is an old Spanish word for saddle, and it was applied to these islands because of the shape of the tortoise shells the first sailors found here. The Galapagos giant tortoise can exceed 400 kilograms and live well past a century. Some individuals in captivity have been credibly documented past 170 years. They are the largest tortoises on Earth, and they got that way through a process that is common on islands. Without large predators and with resources that reward the ability to store food and water in a big body, animals frequently get bigger. But the interesting part is that they did not all become the same tortoise. On the large, wetter, higher islands, where vegetation grows close to the ground and there is grass to eat, the tortoises have dome-shaped shells that come down low over the neck. They do not need to reach up. They need protection. On the small, dry, low islands, where the only reliable food is cactus pads growing well above the ground, the tortoises have saddleback shells. The front of the shell arches up dramatically and the neck and legs are much longer. Those animals can stretch upward to a height a domed tortoise cannot reach. Same ancestor, different islands, different food, different animal. Darwin was told about this while he was there. The vice-governor of the colony explained to him that he could tell which island any tortoise came from by looking at its shell. Darwin noted it and did not immediately grasp what he had been handed. He was, at that point, still more interested in the geology. There is also an uncomfortable footnote. The Beagle took around 30 of these tortoises on board as fresh meat for the voyage home, and the crew threw the shells overboard as they finished them. The physical specimens that might have proved the point were eaten on the trip back. The tortoises paid a heavy price for their own biology. They can survive a year or more without food or water, which made them the perfect provision for sailing ships. Whalers, sealers, and pirates took them by the hundreds of thousands across the 18th and 19th centuries, stacked alive in ships' holds. Several island populations were wiped out entirely. The most famous of them became a symbol. Lonesome George was found on Pinta Island in 1971, the last known individual of his subspecies. Efforts to breed him failed. He died in June 2012, and with him a lineage that had been separating from its relatives for hundreds of thousands of years ended. But there is a genuine second act to that story. The Fernandina tortoise was believed extinct after 1906. In 2019, an expedition on that island found a single old female. Genetic analysis confirmed in 2022 that she was the real thing. The same lineage, still alive, more than a century after the species had been written off. Searches for others are ongoing. Not every ending is final. Sometimes the animal was just very good at not being found. The tortoises also left a mark on the plants, and the plants fought back. The prickly pear cactus of Galapagos is the main source of food and water on the dry islands, and on islands where giant tortoises are present, it does something it does not do elsewhere. It grows a trunk. Not a low, sprawling pad cluster, but a genuine woody trunk several meters tall, lifting the edible pads out of reach of an animal that cannot climb and cannot jump. On islands that never had tortoises, the same species stays low to the ground. That is an arms race written into the shape of a plant. And in the humid highlands there is a tree that should not exist. Scalesia is a genus in the daisy family, the same family as sunflowers and lettuce. On the mainland, these are herbs and small shrubs. Here, in the absence of competition from real trees, a daisy colonized the islands and grew into a forest. Scalesia forests reach 15 meters, with trunks and canopies and epiphytes growing on them, and they are made of an overgrown flowering herb. This happens repeatedly on isolated islands. When the seed is empty, whatever arrives first takes it. There was no tree here, so a daisy became one. There is one more thing about the tortoises that is easy to miss, and it involves a bird. Giant tortoises attract ticks, and they cannot reach most of their own body to remove them. So they have an arrangement with the finches and the mockingbirds. A tortoise that wants to be cleaned rises up on all four legs, extends its neck as far as it will go, and holds the posture, a deliberate, unmistakable signal. Small birds then move over the exposed skin of the legs and neck, taking ticks. The tortoise is not tolerating the birds, it is requesting them, and holding an uncomfortable position for as long as the service continues. There are land iguanas here too, and they are a different story from their marine cousins. Yellow-orange, heavier through the head, living inland and eating cactus pads, spines and all. And on one island, something happened between the two that should not be possible. On South Plaza, where the territory of land iguanas overlaps with a marine iguana colony, hybrids have been documented, the offspring of a male marine iguana and a female land iguana. The animals that result are physically distinctive, with the claws of the marine iguana and the head shape and coloring closer to the land species, and they can climb cactus and swim. They are also sterile. The two lineages have been separated for millions of years, long enough that a cross can be conceived, but not long enough to produce a functioning dead end. It is one of the clearest natural illustrations anywhere of what separate species actually means in practice, and it is happening on a small island in the middle of the Pacific. There are snakes here as well, and for a long time almost nobody paid attention to them. The Galapagos racers are slender, non-venomous constrictors, generally under a meter long, feeding on lava lizards, geckos, insects, and small birds. They are not dangerous to anything larger than a rat, and for most of the history of the archipelago, they were an afterthought. Then a film crew on Fernandina documented what happens on those beaches when marine iguanas hatch. The hatchlings emerge from nests in the sand and have to cross open ground to reach the rocks. The racers know this, and they wait. Dozens of them, coiled among the boulders and buried in loose sand at the edge of the beach. When a hatchling breaks cover, the snakes explode outward simultaneously from multiple directions. The hatchling's only advantage is that the snakes hunt largely by movement. An animal that freezes is frequently missed. An animal that runs is chased by everything at once. So the young iguanas alternate. Absolute stillness, then a burst of speed, then stillness again, making a decision every few seconds that determines whether they reach the rocks. Sharing the same lava are the lava lizards, small, fast, and present on almost every island, with different species on different islands, exactly as with the tortoises and the finches. Males do push-up displays from raised rocks to hold territory, and the display pattern differs between islands, which is one of the ways the species are told apart. Females develop a red throat when they are reproductively active. They also do something worth watching for. Lava lizards routinely climb onto resting marine iguanas to catch the flies attracted to them. A small predator using a much larger animal as a hunting platform, and the iguana appears to have no objection at all. Now let's go back into the water, where the cold current is paying for everything. There is a penguin on the equator. That sentence should not work, and it is the only place on Earth where it does. The Galapagos penguin stands about 50 centimeters tall and weighs around 2 kilograms. It is the only penguin whose range crosses the equator, and the northernmost part of Isabella Island puts some of these birds in the northern hemisphere. It survives because of the Cromwell Current upwelling, which delivers cold water and dense schools of small fish right to the western islands. Fernandina and western Isabella hold the overwhelming majority of the population. Living on the equator with a body built for cold water creates an obvious problem: overheating. So this penguin has an entire behavioral toolkit for shedding heat. It stands with its flippers held out from its body to increase surface area. It pants. It hunches forward to shade its own feet because its feet are bare skin and vulnerable to sunburn. It seeks out lava caves and crevices during the hottest hours, and it does most of its foraging in the coolest parts of the day. It is also one of the rarest penguins in the world, with a population usually estimated between 1,000 and 2,000 birds, and its fate is tied directly to the current. In strong El Niño years, when the upwelling collapses and the fish disappear, this population can crash by more than half. It has done so more than once in living memory, and each time it has to rebuild from a smaller and smaller base. Sharing those same shorelines is a bird that took island life to its logical conclusion. The flightless cormorant is found on Fernandina, and the western coast of Isabella, and nowhere else on the planet. There are somewhere around 1,000 to 1,500 of them in total. Its ancestors could fly. It cannot. Its wings are roughly a third of the size they would need to be to lift its body, and they are ragged with loose barbs. The feathers themselves are no longer built for flight. This is what happens when a trait stops being necessary. Flight is metabolically expensive to maintain. On an island with abundant food directly offshore and no ground predators to escape from, an animal that invests less in wings and more in swimming muscle simply does better. Over enough generations, the wings go. What it built instead is a diving body. Powerful legs set far back, enormous webbed feet, a heavy keel, dense bones. It hunts eels, octopus, and bottom fish close to shore, propelling itself with its feet rather than its wings, working the seafloor within a few hundred meters of the coast. You can still see the ghost of what it used to be. After every dive, it comes out onto the rocks and holds those useless wings open to dry, exactly the way every other cormorant on Earth does. A behavior inherited from ancestors that needed dry flight feathers, performed by a bird that will never leave the ground. And the vulnerability is obvious the moment you understand it. This species has no escape route. Its entire world population lives on the coastline of 2 islands in an area you could drive across in an afternoon. A single introduced predator, or one severe El Niño at the wrong moment, could take a substantial fraction of everything that exists. Let's pause here in the middle of this journey because what is coming next is even stranger, including a bird that kills its own sibling as standard practice, a thief that cannot land on water, and the blood drinker I promised you at the start. If you are enjoying this trip through Galapagos and you want to come with us on the next ones, subscribe to Doc Wild 4K right now. We publish new wildlife documentaries constantly, taking you to the wildest and least explored corners of the planet. And subscribers are always the first to see them. You get every new expedition before everyone else. Turn on the bell so you do not miss the next one. Let's keep going, because the islands are not done being strange. Standing on the lava with feet the color of a swimming pool is the bird most people picture when they think of these islands. The blue-footed booby's feet really are that blue, and the color is not decoration. It comes from carotenoid pigments the bird obtains from its diet, primarily fresh fish, and the body cannot manufacture them. Carotenoids are also used by the immune system, so a bird that is healthy, well-fed, and successfully hunting has bright blue feet, and a bird that is struggling does not. The feet are an honest advertisement, and the birds treat them exactly that way. In courtship, the male performs a slow, deliberate high step, lifting each foot and placing it down in front of the female, tilting it so she can see it clearly. She watches the feet. Experiments in which male foot color was artificially dulled found that females paired to those males subsequently invested less in their eggs. The hunting is the other half of the story. Blue-footed boobies feed by plunge diving, spotting fish from the air and folding into an arrow to hit the water. They dive from heights of up to 24 meters and enter the water at speeds around 90 kilometers per hour. To survive that repeatedly, they have air sacs in the skull and around the neck and chest that cushion the impact, and nostrils that are permanently sealed shut. They breathe through the corners of their mouths. They also hunt in coordinated groups. A flock will circle above a school of fish, and then the entire group dives at once, dozens of birds hitting the water within a second or two of each other. From above, the surface looks like it is being shelled. Their relative, the Nazca booby, does something that is much harder to watch. A Nazca booby lays 2 eggs a few days apart. The first chick to hatch is larger and stronger. Within days, it begins pushing its sibling out of the nest scrape, and the parents do not intervene. The second chick, once outside the nest ring, is not recognized or fed. It dies of exposure or is taken by a predator, and the parents watch this happen without responding. This is called obligate siblicide. And in the Nazca booby, it is not an occasional tragedy in hard years. It is what almost always happens. The second egg is not a second chick. It is insurance, a backup in case the first egg fails to hatch or the first chick dies early. If both survive to hatching, the backup is spent. It is one of the most efficient and least sentimental reproductive strategies in the bird world, and the birds performing it are elegant, white, and look entirely innocent doing it. Above all of them, riding the thermals without appearing to move, is a bird that has built its whole existence around taking things from others. The frigate bird has the largest wingspan to body weight ratio of any bird on Earth. Its skeleton weighs less than its feathers do. It can stay airborne for extraordinary lengths of time with minimal effort, and it does, because it has a problem. Its feathers are not properly waterproof. A frigate bird cannot land on the ocean. If it goes down on the water, it becomes waterlogged and it will not get up again. So it feeds without landing. It snatches flying fish from just above the surface. It takes hatchling turtles and chicks. And it does the thing it is famous for. It chases boobies and other seabirds returning to the colony with full stomachs, harasses them in flight, grabs their tail feathers, and forces them to regurgitate their catch, then catches the falling fish in mid-air before it hits the water. The males have one of the most conspicuous displays in the animal kingdom. During breeding season, a male inflates a bare patch of skin on his throat into an enormous scarlet balloon, sometimes taking 20 minutes to fill it, then sits in the vegetation with his head thrown back, drumming on the pouch and calling as females fly overhead, evaluating the display. And frigate birds sleep in the air. Instruments fitted to great frigate birds recorded them sleeping while flying, in short bursts, often with only one hemisphere of the brain asleep at a time, and occasionally with both, while soaring over open ocean, sometimes on flights lasting days. On land, they sleep for many hours a night. In the air, they get by on a fraction of that. On Hispaniola, at the southeastern end of the archipelago, an entire species has decided that this one island is the only acceptable place on Earth to breed. The waved albatross has a wingspan approaching 2.5 meters, and virtually the entire world population nests on Hispaniola. They spend most of the year at sea, ranging along the coast of Peru and Ecuador, and return to the same island, often to the same partner, in pairings that can persist for decades. Their courtship is a long, formal ritual. Bills clacked together rapidly, heads swayed and circled, bows exchanged, a sequence performed over and over. Pairs that have been together for years still perform it every time they reunite. The problem with being that big on an island that flat is takeoff. An albatross needs airflow over the wings to get up, and it cannot generate that from a standing start. So the birds walk, sometimes considerable distances, to the cliffs on the island's southern edge, waddle to the lip, and drop off, falling toward the sea until the air catches them, and they convert the fall into flight. Watching an albatross launch is watching an animal that is clumsy in every respect until the exact moment it is not. Before we leave the birds, we have to deal with the ones that started all of this. In October 1835, a 26-year-old naturalist left these islands carrying a box of dead birds. He had been here 5 weeks and had been bored for most of it. He thought what he had collected was a mixed bag of blackbirds, finches, and wrens, and he had not bothered to write down which island each specimen came from. 2 years later, in London, an ornithologist named John Gould went through that box and told him they were not blackbirds and not wrens. They were more than a dozen separate species of finch, found nowhere else on Earth. All descended from a single ancestor that had arrived here and then split apart into different birds on different islands. Charles Darwin then had to write to other men from his ship and ask for their collections because they had labeled theirs by island, and he had not. The most consequential observation in the history of biology nearly evaporated because a young man in a hurry did not think the birds were important. And the finches are not merely a historical footnote. They are the best documented case of evolution ever observed. There are around 18 species of Darwin's finch. Genetically, they are close enough that a non-specialist looking at them sees the same drab little bird over and over. The difference is in the beak, and the beak is everything. Ground finches have deep, heavy, crushing beaks for cracking seeds, and the depth varies by species according to how hard the seeds they specialize in are. Cactus finches have long, pointed beaks for probing flowers and feeding on cactus pulp. Tree finches have beaks built for insects in bark and leaves. The warbler finch has a fine, thin beak and behaves like a warbler, gleaning small insects from foliage. Same ancestor, roughly 2 million years, one variable. And in the 1970s, two researchers, Peter and Rosemary Grant, decided to stop treating this as ancient history and simply measure it. They went to Daphne Major, a small, uninhabited cone in the middle of the archipelago, and began capturing, measuring, and marking essentially every medium ground finch on the island. Then they went back and did it again, year after year, for 4 decades. In 1977, a severe drought hit. Small, soft seeds ran out first, and what remained were large, hard seeds that only birds with deep, powerful beaks could crack. The finch population on the island collapsed, and the birds that survived were disproportionately the ones with the deepest beaks, because they could eat what was left. The next generation, born from those survivors, had measurably deeper beaks than the generation before the drought. The Grants had the measurements to prove it, bird by bird, on an entire island population. Then in the 1980s came heavy El Niño rains. Small, soft seeds became abundant again, and beak depth moved back the other way. They did not reconstruct evolution from fossils. They watched it happen in both directions inside a human career. And one of these birds does something that almost no animal outside the primates does. The woodpecker finch feeds on grubs living in tunnels inside dead wood, food that a woodpecker would extract with a long barbed tongue. This finch has no such tongue. So it picks up a cactus spine or a small twig, and where necessary trims it to length, holds it in its beak, inserts it into the tunnel, and uses it to spear the grub or drive it out where it can be grabbed. It is genuine tool use, including modification of the tool, in a bird the size of a sparrow. There are also mockingbirds here, and there is a historical injustice worth correcting. It was the mockingbirds, not the finches, that first made Darwin uneasy. He noticed while he was still on the islands that the mockingbirds differed from one island to the next, and unlike the finches, he had labeled those specimens by location. His first written speculation that species might not be fixed refers to the mockingbirds. The finches got the credit. The mockingbirds did the work. Now go under the water at the far northern end of the archipelago, where 2 tiny islands sit alone in the open Pacific. Darwin and Wolfe are barely more than rocks. Almost nobody lives near them, and the water around them holds the highest concentration of sharks ever measured anywhere on Earth. Surveys have recorded shark biomass here at levels that exceed every other reef system on the planet. Scalloped hammerheads gather in schools of hundreds, hanging in the current in slow, coordinated formations. Galapagos sharks, silky sharks, and blacktips move through in numbers. The reason is the same reason everything else works here. The currents converge, the upwelling delivers nutrients, the fish concentrate, and the predators follow. And then there are the whale sharks, and they come with a genuine unsolved mystery. Whale sharks pass Darwin Island seasonally, and the ones that come here are almost all the same. Enormous, mature females, most of them well over 10 meters, and a striking proportion of them appear to be pregnant. Elsewhere in the world, whale shark aggregations are dominated by small juvenile males feeding at the surface. Here it is the opposite. Nobody knows where whale sharks give birth. Nobody has ever documented it. These animals appear to be passing through Galapagos on the way to somewhere, and researchers have been tagging them for years trying to work out where that is. The answer has not been found. The same currents bring in everything else that is large. Green sea turtles nest on Galapagos beaches and feed in the shallows year-round. And the population here is resident rather than migratory in the way most green turtle populations are. Golden rays and spotted eagle rays move through the shallows in loose formations. Mobula rays gather in numbers offshore. And in the cold water on the western side, where the Cromwell upwelling is strongest, there is a fish that looks like a mistake. The ocean sunfish is round, flattened, almost tailless, and can exceed 1,000 kilograms, the heaviest bony fish in the ocean. It feeds in deep, cold water and then comes up to be cleaned, hanging near the surface while smaller fish pick parasites off its skin. It has to do this because it carries a parasite load that would be lethal without maintenance, and the cleaning stations off Isabella and Fernandina are among the most reliable places on Earth to see it happening. Closer to shore, the mammals are the ones that will interact with you whether you want them to or not. The Galapagos sea lion is everywhere, sprawled across docks, benches, boats, and beaches, entirely unbothered by human presence. Females and pups form colonies in the shallows, and the pups spend enormous amounts of time playing in the surf, chasing each other, and investigating anything that enters the water, including divers. The Galapagos fur seal is the smaller, more retiring relative, and it is the smallest of all the fur seals. It prefers shaded, rocky coastlines on the western islands, feeds mostly at night in deeper water, and avoids sunlight far more than its cousin. It was hunted almost to extinction for its pelt in the 19th century and recovered from a very small remnant population. On land, the Galapagos hawk is the only real avian predator here, and it has an unusual social arrangement. It practices cooperative polyandry. A single female pairs with as many as 7 or 8 males simultaneously, all of whom mate with her, all of whom help defend the territory, and all of whom help raise the chicks without any of them knowing which are theirs. On islands with limited territory, this appears to be a more effective use of available males than having them compete and fail. On Genovesa, in the north, there is an owl doing something that owls generally do not. The Galapagos short-eared owl hunts in broad daylight there. On most islands, it would be pushed into the night by the Galapagos hawk, but Genovesa has no hawks, so the owl took the day shift as well. Its prey is storm petrels, and there are enormous numbers of them nesting in cavities in the lava field. The owl walks. It moves on foot across the broken volcanic rock, positioning itself beside a nest cavity entrance and waits for a bird to come out or come in. When one does, it takes it with a strike from a standing position, in daylight, on the ground. There is nothing typical about that. It is an owl that gave up flying hunts and night vision advantages because a specific island handed it an opportunity nothing else was using. And covering the black lava at the waterline in numbers are Sally Lightfoot crabs, brilliant red and orange against the rock, scattering in every direction when a shadow passes, feeding on algae, and on the ticks they pick off resting marine iguanas. Now for the one I promised you at the very beginning. 600 kilometers northwest of the main islands on Wolf and Darwin, live seabird colonies, boobies mostly, packed onto small volcanic islands with very little fresh water and almost nothing growing. There are finches there too, ordinary-looking brown birds descended from the same colonists that produced all the others in the archipelago, facing a specific problem. On a rock with no fresh water and very little plant food, what do you eat and what do you drink? They started with something that makes sense. Like several other finches, they pick parasites off the skin of seabirds, a normal, mutually useful arrangement seen throughout the natural world. Then some of them noticed that when the pecking drew blood, the blood was worth having. The vampire finch now feeds regularly on the blood of Nazca and red-footed boobies. It lands on the seabird's back, works to the base of the tail or wing feathers where the skin is thin, and pecks with a sharp beak until it opens a wound. Then it drinks. The most striking part is the booby's reaction, which is essentially nothing. It shakes itself occasionally. It may shuffle. It does not usually leave, and it does not attack the finch. Several finches may feed from one bird in sequence, and there is often a queue. The best explanation is that the behavior evolved from the useful version. Boobies tolerate small birds on their backs because small birds remove parasites, and by the time the pecking turns into bloodletting, the tolerance is already built in. Interrupting it costs energy. The individual loss is small, and the birds appear to have never developed a defense. These finches also eat eggs, and they do it by rolling them. A finch will push a booby egg with its beak and legs until it rolls into a rock and cracks, then feed on the contents. That is where a Darwin finch ended up. Same lineage that produced seed eaters and cactus specialists and insect probers. Put a population on a barren rock with no water and abundant seabirds, leave it alone long enough, and it becomes a blood drinker. Which brings us to what is actually happening to these islands. Almost everything that has ever threatened Galapagos arrived on a boat. The tortoise harvest was the first wave. Hundreds of thousands taken as ship provisions across 2 centuries, entire island populations erased. Then came what the ships left behind, which turned out to be worse. Goats, released to provide meat for future visits, multiplied without any predator and stripped the vegetation off entire islands, destroying the plant communities the tortoises depended on. Rats came off ships and ate the eggs and hatchlings of tortoises, iguanas, and ground-nesting birds. Cats took young iguanas and birds. Pigs dug up nests. Fire ants introduced plants, blackberry thickets, each one an animal or plant that the native species had no evolved response to because for millions of years, nothing here had needed one. That is the trap of island evolution, the tameness that makes Galapagos wildlife extraordinary to be around. Animals that do not flee, that walk past you, that sit on the path and decline to move, is the same trait that leaves them defenseless against anything that actually wants to eat them. But this is also where the story turns, because some of the most successful ecological restoration ever attempted has happened here. The goat eradication on northern Isabella, carried out in the early 2000s, removed roughly 140,000 feral goats from an area of hundreds of thousands of hectares. It used ground hunting, aerial hunting, trained dogs, and a technique in which sterilized goats fitted with radio collars were released to find and reveal the last remaining herds. It remains one of the largest island restoration projects ever completed, and the vegetation on those slopes recovered. Rats have been eradicated from several islands. Tortoise breeding and repatriation programs run by the Galapagos National Park and the Charles Darwin Foundation have released thousands of juvenile tortoises back onto islands where the population had collapsed, and several of those populations are now reproducing in the wild without help. The pressures have not stopped. Industrial fishing fleets work the waters at the edge of the marine reserve. Tourism brings hundreds of thousands of visitors a year, along with the constant risk of new introductions. A parasitic fly whose larvae feed on the nestlings of Darwin's finches has spread through the archipelago and is now one of the most serious threats to the very birds the islands are famous for. But the direction is not uniformly downward, and that matters. Here is what I want to leave you with. Almost everywhere else on Earth, the animals you see were shaped primarily by fear. The speed of a gazelle is a statement about lions. The shell of a mussel is a statement about crabs. Most of what an animal is, anywhere else, is an argument it is having with something that wants to eat it. Galapagos is what you get when you remove that argument. Nothing arrived here to hunt them. You hunt. So instead of being shaped by predators, these animals were shaped by scarcity, by isolation, by temperature, by the specific accident of which ancestor happened to survive the crossing on a raft of vegetation, and by nothing else. A lizard that learned to graze the seafloor and shrink its own bones. A cormorant that gave up flying because it had nothing to fly from. a finch that became a vampire because there was no water and there were boobies. That is why they do not run from you. Not because they are friendly, because for millions of years nothing here was worth running from. And that is exactly why they are so easy to lose. Tell me in the comments which of these left you speechless. The iguana that shrinks its own skeleton to survive, the cormorant that traded its wings for the sea, the booby chick that pushes its own sibling out of the nest, or the finch that drinks blood. Leave a like if this journey was worth your time, subscribe if you have not already, and share this video with someone who thinks Galapagos is just tortoises. Until the next one, go somewhere wild. Doc Wild 4K